Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. We're finishing up another very productive week here in the House, and the culmination for us of some stuff that's been going on since the beginning of session. We've got a few people with us today, and I'm going to start with Representative Neely. Representative Neely has been one of the strongest advocates in the House for Missouri's children, particularly those 13,000 children that are in foster care across our state. And he, along with the chairwoman of the Children and Families Committee, Representative Diane Franklin, have done some tremendous work this year to update Missouri's laws on foster care. And so this week, Representative Neely moved forward his House committee bill from his special committee, and so he's going to talk a little bit about those efforts.
Thank you. Would you all kind of step this way for the cameras?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't thank the Speaker enough. You know, he gave us the opportunity to make a wonderful committee bill, and we had some good members on that committee, and we asked them to come up with some legislation to help kids. And the reason I came down here as a physician, I didn't come down here because of health care issues. I came down here because of children and the things that I've seen over my years. Having come from a background of teachers, I heard my parents, my dad was an administrator and my mom a teacher, and I heard about children's issues all my life. And so with the Speaker's good privilege of allowing us to come up with some legislation, we worked with Children's Division, and we have several pieces of legislation. There was actually 10 bills that we compiled into the one committee bill, and believe it or not, I can't name them all right off the bat, but let me, if you work with me a little bit, we'll pop up some of those. We currently have a system where we have two entities out there that are doing case management, and we have a discrepancy. One of them has 14 days and the other one's 30. We can put them both on par to give both entities 30 days to complete their case study. The other one is that we need birth certificates, and we charge ourselves for those birth certificates in solving problems. So we solved that problem by eliminating that charge that we may have, and that's all within the division. We've also asked that kids that are over anybody that goes in school, that they go ahead and receive their immunizations, even if they're not up to speed. The kids around those students that are in school in foster care, they've already been immunized, so that's not a major issue. That's kind of a health care issue. We've also added that the kids over the age of 10 continue on with periodic physician involvement in staying up to speed. You know, we all want preventative care. We also ask that we share some information across state lines. You all may know about a circumstance in Kansas City where if we'd provided more information to other agencies, that we could have maybe helped a particular child and specifically, but that goes everywhere. You know, sharing information, keeping everybody on board, and that's just a few of the 10 bills that we put on board. So hopefully that can provide some direction.
Questions, foster care stuff?
Representative Neely, what about the time frame? May the 18th, the deadline. Do you think there's enough time to get those 10 bills or some of them through?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is a great bill, and I think with the Speaker's leadership, you know, we can't thank him enough, and the floor leader and the Speaker Pro Temp, that we're going to roll with this.
On that Kansas City case, I believe, was that a murder? I believe the child was murdered? Or?
I don't know all the details, but that's my understanding. Okay. Yes, sir.
Speaker, if you would talk a little bit too about creating that committee and this effort on foster care this year, why did you have that focus?
Well, I think it was a recognition that there were a number of issues out there, and we felt like if we could put a committee together that could look at sort of the issue more comprehensively, then we get to a better result. Certainly the First Lady had a hand in bringing some of these issues to light. It was a passion for her, and so that, along with the members on this committee who really had a passion for dealing in this space, gave us the confidence that we needed to have a committee that sort of comprehensively looked at the issue and came back with some recommendations, which they did. Anything else on that? The second thing that we want to talk about a little bit today are the efforts of Representative Finelli. One of the things that this majority's been driving at for a number of years is more transparency in government. Representative Finelli had a great bill this year to highlight where some of our special taxing districts are, which get very complicated and confusing for people to understand. So I'm going to allow him to talk a little bit about that bill and the advancement through the process this week.
Hi. The growth of special taxing districts in our state is an issue that has continued to come up, especially in the last 10 years. We now have 2,200 of these districts across our state, and most of them have been created very recently. Unfortunately, there's currently no state entity that provides a comprehensive view of where all these districts are and how they overlap. And when they overlap, they tend to put upward pressures on sales tax rates. And in places in Kansas City and in places in St. Louis and a few other spots in our state, we're seeing sales tax rates that are over 10%. In some places, they're edging up to 12. And so the purpose of this bill is to have the Department of Revenue create an online interactive map that will map out digitally all of these special taxing districts, show how they overlap, show what that pressure does to sales tax rates, and that serves two purposes. People will know where they shop, where they work, where they live, that these districts exist and what that's doing to their receipts when they go to the register and where that money is supposed to go. It also provides legislators an avenue to look at how many of these districts are in their district and affecting their constituents, so that we can wrap our heads around this growth and understand how to better hold these districts accountable to the taxpayer.
Would you talk about how much do you think the average consumer is going to use that resource?
Well, you know, the use of digital resources to make big shopping decisions is becoming more and more prevalent. If you're going to buy something that's of a sizable amount, to just go on the website and see that if you buy it in this Best Buy or the one down the street, you could see a 2% difference in your sales tax rate. That could mean a significant amount of money to a taxpayer and could affect their decision-making process. So I think it's certainly plausible.
Anything else on that? Obviously, thank you, Phil. Obviously, the other big news this week, we have the budget headed towards conference. We're very pleased to see the Senate move so quickly through that process, so we can have the bills in conference next week. And so the budget chairman can give you all kind of an update on where that is.
Yeah, so we had a little more time for the budget this year. The governor got it to us a little earlier, and then he did his first year. And we obviously have the longest session we could possibly have under the Constitution this year. So that's helped relieve a little bit of pressure that was there last year on the timeline. But the Senate got the budget out yesterday in a relatively short period. And so I'm hoping that Senator Brown and I will be able to get to work next week and trying to figure out how we're going to, work everything together to have a balanced budget. I think that they spent a little more money than we did, but I still think that they have a good budget plan that is workable for conference. And my goal would be that Senator Brown and I can work through some of that next week and hopefully be ready to bring the bills up the following week. So if there are any questions about the differences or anything, I could try to answer those.
I know you talked about this on the floor, but would you highlight what you see as some of the major differences between the two chambers? Yeah,
so I think the biggest differences in terms of number of dollars is going to be the formula for K-12. We recommended full funding of that. They recommended about $50.5 million less than that, and so we'll have to figure out how to proceed on that issue. They did use some of that money within the House Bill 2002, which is the education budget bill. So, we have the flexibility of moving some of that around. It's not a secret that one of my top priorities is fully funding the formula and keeping our commitment on the pre-K expansion that most of the members that are serving today made a few years ago. That once we fully funded the formula, that expansion would be available. So I like to keep our commitments that we make, and so that'll be one of the desires I have in conference. But beyond that, the pay plan, there's a difference there. Missouri Consolidated Healthcare Plan, they put some money back that we both increased their budget. They just increased it by more, and so that'll be a point of discussion. And then in the social services space, they made a reduction to autism services that we'll have to talk about, but they also made some increases in the nursing home line. So I think there's plenty of room for compromise. And in preliminary discussions with Senator Brown, we have I think we're both in a good place and ready to start working together cooperatively to try to get this thing done. So
the Senate, I think, gave corrections workers an additional $700.
Yeah, they did. So what they did with the pay plan is they made it in effect January of instead of July 1st. So they basically did it for half a fiscal year, which saved half the money this year. The challenge there is that we'll have to come up with the other half next year. We'll have to either cut something or use additional revenue growth to do that. But yeah, in corrections, they did do that. We've got a lot of vacancies in the corrections department, specifically with correctional officers. and part of that is it's a pretty demanding job and it doesn't pay a lot. And so, I understand where he's coming from. I know it's been a priority of Senator Brown's for a while, and so if there's a way to work in to do something specific for corrections officers, we'll do our best to do that.
It's my understanding that they also removed money in the Senate that would have gone towards a drug monitoring program. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's it's one of those things that the administration had started to move forward on last year, and we had some discussions with them that would be a perilous decision if they tried to do that without an appropriation, and they wisely chose to seek an appropriation for that purpose. The House gave them the appropriation in our budget. The Senate didn't agree to that. I suspect that might have something to do with Senator Schaaf, but I haven't had a chance to speak with Senator Brown about that one specifically. We'll just see how it works out. I'll support the House position because I do prefer that method to the traditional PDMP as we think of it, and would like to see some support for that. But we'll see how the Senate feels about that in conference.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Roan announced this week at a House committee I was at that a committee will investigate and study the funding for the Department of Ag. He says they don't have enough funding to do their job properly, and each division is losing money. Your reaction?
I think that just depends on what we determine the scope of the Department of Agriculture is and what jobs we want them to do. And so, I think that we've given them adequate funding to do the missions that we're telling them to do right now. But if Representative Roan determines in his investigation that there are missions that they're not meeting, then we can look at address that in the budget next year.
Did the Senate take any action that affected the agreement you had concerning higher education and holding tuition?
No, they initially in the committee process had broken some of that money out for performance funding, and then they decided to walk that back and go back to the House position on institutional core funding. So the Senate did affirm that agreement, and it did take. It wasn't something the House could do on their own, so we appreciate the Senate working with us on accomplishing that, and I think it'll result in a positive outcome for the families and students who pay tuition in the state of Missouri.
What was the difference, or I think you referenced a difference on the floor between the House and the Senate regarding the whole checkpoints versus saturation efforts?
Oh, yeah, the House budget had directed the funding for drunk driving enforcement to saturation patrols exclusively, and the Senate's budget reversed that to allowing checkpoints to be a method of enforcement, so we'll have to discuss that in conference too. Thanks, guys.
All right, what else?
How close are you to collecting enough signatures for a special session?
Yeah, we've made significant progress again this week, and we've begun the discussions with the minority party to get their members' signatures. So that process is on track and moving forward.
How many has
I'll say a significant number. I haven't looked at the list today, but we're well over a majority of the Republicans, and I anticipate that we'll have well over a majority of the Democrats.
Is it taking longer than you thought, or is this?
No,
I thought it was going to be done this week.
Well, look, everybody thinks things are going to happen on a timeline, but the reality is the process of talking to members and collecting signatures from 163 members takes some time. So the process is on track and exactly from a timeline perspective where we expect it to be.
Mr. Speaker, have you heard anything about another report being issued by the special committee, A and B, a time frame on that?
Well, as you all well know, the committee has been widely reported. The committee has continued to work. They have been looking into the mission continues and the facts surrounding that. I anticipate in the near future they'll have a report.
Is the hiring of the judge and another attorney signal to you that impeachment is looming?
It signals to me that the House committee felt like it needed some additional help, both with the investigation and with the legal matters that are involved in that investigation. So we're happy to have both of those gentlemen on board and their expertise as part of the process moving forward.
Have you spoken with the governor since all of this is, since the committee issued its last report? Or?
I have spoken with the governor at one point in time prior to my call for his resignation. I haven't spoken to him since.
Are you concerned with any of the governor's conversations with other lawmakers?
I have no idea what the content of those conversations are, so I don't have a comment beyond that.
Are you interested in the content of those conversations?
Look, the governor's free to talk to members about anything he'd like. So no, I'm not concerned about the content of those conversations. But again, I don't know what the content of those conversations were or are, so I'm not going to comment on it beyond that.
Has leadership considered this idea of the disabled committee?
I've heard no substantive discussion of that at all.
Some have been critical, saying that this has been a distraction, that it's keeping the lawmakers and the legislature from getting work done. But we've had another full slate of bills move again through this week. I mean, do you think there are any concerns there?
I think the legislature is doing its job, and I think the legislature is doing the work that the people of Missouri sent us here to do, and it's a big credit to the majority floor leader and to the minority floor leader who have helped keep this process that we have in the House on track. And so I'm really proud to see the substantive priorities that have moved through the House. I'm really proud to see the way that the Senate and the House are working together, and I think we're on track to have a really productive session.
The Senate was, President Pro Tem Richards says that he'd like to hold the bills until he can't hold them any longer. So my understanding is the deadline for that is May 30th, and the reason for holding the bills is so that the governor doesn't have that leverage over other lawmakers who might put their families in. So my question is, do you anticipate an impeachment vote before May 30th?
Look, I'm not going to comment on that one way or the other. As it relates to signing of the bills, we're going to follow our regular process. And our regular process is that I have to make the 4-hour trek from Poplar Bluff up here on the 30th of May to sign the bills. So our intention here in the House is to follow the regular process that we always use. Anything else?
Any comment on Ron Richards' health?
Well, look, I appreciate the Pro Tem's concern for my health, and I appreciate the fact that it led my wife to send me to the doctor for a full checkup. Happy to report that I'm in good health. But I will say, earlier this year, I did start to have some concerns. His bowling game, the Senate bowling tournament, was not what it should be for a man who owns 2 bowling alleys. Second, at his advanced age, I think he could probably stand to get a little more exercise than he's doing. I understand he's been spending a lot of time staring out the window. I think most concerning to me is that apparently all of this has caused him so much stress that he's been unable to get his shoes shined on a regular basis, which Senator Kehoe tells me is very important. So I am concerned about the Pro Tem, and I'm sure his wife this weekend will be looking after him. Thanks, guys.